So today we are going to see how layers work in Capture One. The idea is that here you have a list of layers, for now just the background, and you can apply separately each modification to the exposure, to the high dynamic range, to whatever you want to that single layer. So let's create a new layer with the plus, and we can give it a name. Let's call it first layer. Okay, so right now this layer, if I change the exposure, it does nothing, simply because we haven't defined where this layer has to be applied. So you have different tools here that you can use to mask the layer. So for instance, if I take this mask brush here and I use it on this part of the image, since we have our exposure at 4, it changes the exposure there. If I go to -4, it darkens only that portion of the image. So the brush tool has several options. So the size is obviously how big or how small the brush is. Hardness is the outer smooth part of the brush. So this is a really harsh brush, while if you go to 0 with the hardness, you also have this shadow on the outside. Then the opacity is simply how much the effect should be applied to this particular mask. And finally, the flow means for each pass in a single area, how much mask the layer should have. So let's have an example. If I press M, I activate the visual mask on this layer. Okay, and now you can see that we already have some masking that we have done earlier. So let's clear the mask and do some tries. So let's pick a reasonable size and let's look at the hardness. For now I'm putting the flow at its maximum. So, and if I draw something like this, you see that on the outside of the mask you have a lower impact of the masking performed by the brush, because we have selected hardness 0. But if I select hardness 100 and you pass here, you can clearly see that this changes quite substantially. Now we don't have any outer edge and everything is applied as it is 100%. Then let's look at the opacity. If I go with a really low opacity, what you can see is that you basically see nothing. Okay, really nothing. You can almost see something really small. Let's raise it a bit. You can see, but it's not so evident, and certainly less evident than before. Okay, of course, if I'm going over and over, this changes, but as I am keeping press, you see I can go over the same area in which I have already brushed, and it doesn't change anything. Then we have the flow. So right now flow is at 100, which means that if you go over and over the same area, it doesn't change because it applies the maximum masking on the first pass. But if I go down to a really low flow, let's say like this, and I perform my masking, you see that it's less visible. But now if I pass over the same area, you see that it rapidly becomes more evident, right? So the difference between opacity and flow is subtle. With the flow, I usually like more the flow because it allows you to really brush over an image and like so, and simply focus and pass more times on the areas of interest. Okay, now let's clear this mask and I'll show you. So let's take a look at the auto mask here. The auto mask helps in defining a more precise mask. So let's take a look. If I brush over here, you see that even if I want to brush just the finger, some part of the mask is outside of it on the background. But since I have the auto mask option enabled, as soon as I release my mouse button, you see that Capture One did quite a pretty good job here in defining the precise mask, because it looks for the colors where you have had your mask defined and the colors which have been affected. Okay, and so you can perform even the same here, and again Capture One does a pretty good job. Great. So the other kind of masks that you can have, let's make another layer and let's call it a gradient layer, is actually the gradient layer itself. So here you can define a gradient layer, and you can see you can play with it. If you press Shift, it's easier to perform masks at 0, 45 or 90 degrees precise. So let's make something like this. Okay, and the idea behind the gradient layer is that beyond this line you have the full mask. Here you have some shadowing which goes rapidly to 0, and after the last line here you don't have any mask applied. This is more evident if we squeeze this just a bit like so. You can see that here you have the full mask, here it's starting to decrease, and here you have almost nothing, and here nothing at all. Another option that we have is the radial layer or radial mask, which is this tool over here, in which you can define something like this, in which the idea is the same as before. You have these three areas, the one in the middle, this here, and the outer part of our mask. And here things works on the inverse, in the sense that when you mask something, by default Capture One applies it on the other part of the image and not where you apply the filter. Okay, but if you want the opposite, you can simply right click on the layer, invert mask, and your mask is applied starting from the middle. Okay, then since we have I'm pressing M, so we remove the mask, the mask visualization. Actually the mask is already there, and now you can play with it. For instance, you can increase the brightness only of this area, or you can decrease the whites, increase the highlights, and everything will be applied only in this area. So let's say that for instance, let's make another example. Let me refine this mask over here like so. Okay, looks quite nice to me. Okay, let's reset everything, and let's say that I want to change the color of this leaf and make it more on the red side. Look at this. The nice thing about this is that we changed the color of the leaf, but for instance this part of the image, which is orange brownish, it's not affected. Okay, look at what happens for instance if I increase this mask here. You see that it is applied also here, which may be not what we want. So masks are really powerful, and one of the main advantages of Capture One is that through layers you can really focus on the part of the image that you want, and you can see that with just a couple of clicks you can really improve your images quite a bit, you see. Okay, thanks for watching.